Have had already been done. And it was so interesting. One of the things I kept wondering is, all right, Kevin Durant demands a trade a couple months ago. You're going to get a flood of offers. Every team is going to call, hey, what is it going to cost for Kevin Durant? And we all heard the reports that Brooklyn was asking for some crazy amount of assets back and blue chip young players and all-stars and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, all right, well, maybe that happens, but maybe not. And I think within the first couple of weeks, Brooklyn got the offers and they kind of knew what it was going to be. And all this stuff about, hey, Memphis is now in the mix and Boston and all that kind of stuff just felt to me more like reporting late on things that had happened, much earlier in the process and the reporting came out. But, I was just waiting for something to just sort of shake the environment a little bit, something to just, cause some ripples and force somebody's hand, whether it be Brooklyn or another team to offer more. Maybe there's another player on another team that demands to be traded or something like that. And then that player could get traded to Brooklyn, like whatever it was. And that thing just never happened. And then you have Kevin Durant meeting with Joe Tsai in London, trying to force that thing to occur, trying to force that ripple effect, trying to shake up the environment himself by demanding Steve Nash and Sean Marks to be fired if he were not traded. And Joe Tsai called his bluff and he was like, you know what, that's not going to do it. And the environment was not shaken. And ultimately, we just ended up back to where we were 2 months ago, which was Kevin Durant is still on the Brooklyn Nets. It's just a little bit more awkward now. But these are all competitors. They're all big boys. They're going to get over it, and they're going to try to, I think, make the most of this season. But that was sort of my first response was, yeah, okay, nothing really changed. Finally, we're done with this.
It's also just I would love to be on the final wall for that conversation, like the first time Kevin sees Sean and Steve after that getting out. Like, because if you're Sean and Steve, you have to, like, that's a level of professionalism and just leaving your pride at the door that I think would be mighty difficult for a lot of folks to just be like, yeah, we'll welcome this guy back in after he tried to get me fired. Like, that's I can only imagine how difficult of a situation that is. And like, did Kevin apologize? Like, I'm sure that was probably not there. And like you said, it's like the competitive part of all of this is that, like, do they just all chalk it up to the game of like, hey,
Right.
Kevin, we get it. It was a leverage pull and you were saying like, hey, we wanted to, but at the same time, I don't know what you say to like fix this. And the Nets are going to be like they're a team that we're just going to look at. And I think it's an exercise in like, how much does chemistry actually matter in the NBA is what we're about to find out in Brooklyn this year, right?
I mean, yes, number one. And the fact that Kevin Durant has always wanted to play with Kyrie Irving and that Kyrie will, I think, be playing more games than he did last year until he finds a new reason to not play basketball. But so the fact that they want to play together helps the chemistry just because those are the two best players on the team. So maybe that's there. I don't know if it becomes sort of like a common enemy thing. Can that work if it's like sort of KD and Kyrie versus management? We've seen that kind of work in the past where like the Kobe Shaq dynamic, and things like that. I don't know. You mentioned whether or not Kevin Durant is going to apologize or what that, having covered KD a little bit when he was with Golden State, like that's not somebody who says sorry.
Right.
I don't see that happening. And Steve Nash was kind of hired and people thought that, okay, he comes from like that Steve Kerr coaching tree a little bit. Like kind of a West Coast guy, given where he spent most of his career. Like maybe he's a little bit more chill, but this is a guy who won 2 MVPs. Like that's not a dude who's just a pushover, right? You don't win 2 MVPs and get to where he was as a Hall of Famer by being sort of just chill and pushover. That dude's a competitive MFer. And I think that's maybe the way to do it is to approach KD and be like, and then just have it out a little bit, right? Like the way that Draymond Green would approach KD and have it out with him in Golden State. And obviously that ended up pushing Kevin Durant, at least somewhat was a factor out of Golden State and towards Brooklyn. But at least for a year, would that be enough? I just wonder what the common enemy is going to be. And I kind of just see it already. How are they going to turn this into a media thing, like some sort of contrived media narrative? I'm just waiting for that to happen where you mentioned being like a fly on the wall for it. I'm thinking about flying up to Brooklyn for media day because I can't wait for that, dude. That is going to be crazy. Steve Nash, how do you feel about coaching a player who demanded you to be fired? What does
Mhm.
Steve Nash say to that? Kevin Durant, when he has to answer media day questions, if, by the way, the Brooklyn Nets PR team make him answer the questions, because I
I was
would
gonna
bet
say,
Kevin Durant.
didn't the Knicks just do the whole Jalen Brunson introduction with no media present?
Yeah, and that's a bad path to go down,
Yeah.
but I can't imagine doing it for media day, because it's one thing for an introductory press conference. It's another thing to not allow media to talk to the players on a day made for media.
Mhm.
Seems a little wild to me. But I don't Kevin Durant's going to be asked these questions. Kyrie's going to be asked these questions. Steve Nash is going to be asked these questions, and there's nowhere to hide. Your owner acknowledged that all these things were happening with his tweet, right? Like, he
Mhm.
publicly acknowledged it. Had he not done that, by the way, and had they not done the public acknowledgement with this weird statement that they did, they could have just always leaked everything to Shams this whole time, as they were doing before, and Woj and all these other guys, and just and then just come out on media and be like, this never even happened. This was all
Mhm.
some media narrative that was way overblown, which would have been fake, but at least you would have had some sort of something to stand behind, right? And now the
Mhm.
fact that your owner and your front office has basically acknowledged that all these trade requests and these rumors have been true this entire time, where do you hide? And I know that it's almost impossible to turn it against the media, but I still feel like the way that this team has operated and the way that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving operate, which is it's the media against us all the time, they'll find a way to flip it. And I just can't wait to see how they're going to try.
And this is probably it's just so weird because think about the other moves that they're making, like while this is going on and while the stuff behind the scenes is just crazy and not sure what's gonna happen with Kyrie, not sure what's gonna happen with KD. It's like, oh, we're gonna give up a first for Royce O'Neal. We're gonna go sign TJ
Right.
Warren. It's very strange that they were operating under the assumption it seems like they were going to continue to contend and continue to build around their core. So they've just had such a weird offseason because I look at this group and you look at they probably need another big. That's like something
Mhm.
that stands out. Like Claxton, I like a lot, but I mean Sharp, we'll see if he's a backup five, and KD can obviously play backup five, and it looks like the report today Ben Simmons might even start at the five. Maybe that's what they try and do, but that's we'll see how
Yeah,
much
I don't
Ben
believe that
Simmons
for a
wants to
second.
do that. Can we also just see Ben Simmons play basketball for a little bit before we start penciling him in? It's like, yeah, I'll just be the Bruce
Before we start
Brown for you
changing his
guys.
position, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a TBD. But you look at it, Kyrie, Patty, Cam Thomas, Seth Curry, Joe Harris, TJ Warren, Royce O'Neal, KD, um, Ben Simmons, Nick Claxton, like that's a pretty deep team. And it's a deep team of mostly vets who you can count on, who you would assume KD and Kyrie would trust and like. And it's 8, 9, 10 deep that you feel pretty good about. Like I like that KD is staying in Brooklyn because the East is far more interesting now. Like I think the Boston stuff was fascinating, and I think that was probably the most intriguing trade option for KD just because of I mean, Boston having to kind of the ultimate question of like, well, Tatum and KD beating them 4 times in a 7-game series seems
Right.
pretty unlikely for a lot of teams in this league if they're both healthy. Like that's just a really hard thing to stop that level of firepower for a healthy run from the two of them. We also just got to the finals with this core, but then you go back the other way. Like I just imagine Brad Stevens just pacing around his office and being like, I mean, we were 500 in February. Like this was not a great situation, and
Right.
were almost at a point where we have to trade somebody because this was not working. Is that really who we were? Is it a Hawk situation where it's like, oh, we just got hot at the right time and we made the Eastern Conference Finals? Let's run it back. We're fine. We'll just get right back to the NBA Finals next year. That was
It
so fascinating to me because I could understand it from
Yeah.
so many different angles. But now that KD is there and Boston's running it back with this group, Miami's not going anywhere, and we'll get to them in a second. The Sixers have reloaded. I think they're better and probably have the best chance of being the number one seed going into the NBA playoffs next year. I just go up and down the list where I'm like, the East is wide
Mhm.
open, and there are so many cases to be made for so many different teams, right?
There is, and to your point about Brooklyn, I really like their depth. I kinda
Mm,
like how they somehow managed to deepen their team while all this Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving stuff was happening. You're right, they probably needed a backup center, but that's it. Uh, I do wonder if Boston ends up regretting not doing this trade at some point, because we're already getting the rumblings that Jaylen Brown could end up being unhappy in Boston at some point, and Jaylen Brown is let's call him an independent thinker. I
Mhm.
wouldn't. He's not quite the flat earther that Kyrie Irving is, but he is somebody who considers himself a little bit of a maverick in a sense that he doesn't want to go with trends and that he's willing to kind of make his own path, and that's sort of always been part of his identity. And I'm
He's
not
a
knocking him
Kanye
for
guy
that, by the
too, I
way.
think. Isn't he
What's
a
that?
Kanye guy?
He's a big Kanye guy. Yeah,
Yes.
he's and so if Kanye gets in his ear one day and is just in a mood where he says, "You know what? You should not be in Boston." And Jaylen
Mm.
Brown wants to listen to him. Who knows? But